Hello, good morning, you beautiful people. Welcome to another edition of the Independent Creator Podcast. That's right, we're still going. We're still doing this thing. So, what we're going to do tonight is actually break down a couple different things. We're going to change the format a little bit, not much. We're just going to take a look at, podcast statistics. We're going to be very analytical on this episode, getting into the numbers and everything that is part of spreadsheets and all sorts of stuff and pie charts. But not really. We're not going to get too deep. We're just going to look into, what is making podcasts actually still a viable option for listening to or actually watching, as right now you're probably doing both or one or the other on this particular episode. So let's actually look into what, especially for Gen Z. Gen Z is still, for being a much younger audience than typically for my generation and older, but they're still listening to a lot of podcasts, which is pretty amazing and pretty powerful still, that this particular generation is still utilizing or using podcasts as a form to gather information, be entertained, and, just still looking at podcasts as a viable art form for us, which is a great thing. Let's actually look into, I have pulled up this is from, actually, just a couple days ago, really, this is one of the, this podcast industry statistics 2025. It's last updated back on March 13th, from podcastindustry.org, saying it on the chart here, that's people within Gen Z listen to podcasts via Spotify, at least, 55.9%. That is a massive amount of people listening to podcasts, when you would think, podcasts as a whole would be, dying off because of short form content like TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. But that's really not the case for my generation and Gen Z. I don't know with Alpha. I don't know. They're probably still too young. They're the ones that are driving the TikTok craze, driving those numbers to remain high. But for most folks, they still listen to podcasts via Spotify. As you can see here, YouTube is commanding a good portion at 20.6. My understanding is that YouTube has been gaining a lot of ground, and they've been pushing for a lot of things for people to listen to podcasts, especially through YouTube Music, that arm of YouTube. And video podcasting is also climbing as well. Like if you're watching this episode right now on YouTube, you are part of, the people who watch YouTube or podcast episodes via YouTube, which, thank you for continuing to watch. But it's also, like I said, it's interesting to see that Spotify commands a huge amount here, that I don't know if it's because of the knock-on effect from them signing Joe Rogan and some other big celebrity guest podcast host, whatever. Is that reason why that Spotify is almost at over 55% of the listenership, when you get Apple Podcasts at 9, just under 10%, and you got Pocket Casts, others, and TikTok, and small little slivers here and there. That's the thing. It was where it's interesting to see that Spotify has this amount of listenership using the service to listen to podcasts. And is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's something that, many people would say that Spotify is kind of gentrifying podcasting as a whole, where it's locking in the user experience, saying, if let's take a podcast show like Joe Rogan, or one of the other ones that Call Me Daddy, or some other shows that are exclusively to Spotify. that you won't be able to use, or won't be able to listen to them via Pocket Cast or via the like a RSS feed that you can plug into Apple Podcasts or anywhere or another podcast player. That's the thing, is this the ground? I shouldn't say the groundbreaking, because it's been a couple of years that this has been going on, but is it cresting that hill where saying all of these exclusive shows can only be heard and sometimes seen because they have been breaking into providing a video portion of the podcast listening and viewing experience on Spotify? But the thing is, it's like, is it too much? Is it Spotify trying to break into this market, or controlling this market? Say, if you want to have a successful podcast show, you can only be on Spotify because that's where people are going to or listening to via our platform. And I have to say that, it's frustrating when you look at this chart and you can see that it's over half of podcast listeners are using Spotify, when there's many other platforms, like I said, players that are more than capable of providing you the same level without, the exclusivity of, staying on Spotify. But going through this little report here, that frequent podcast listeners, its majority is on Spotify. Apple Podcast is 10% less at 25. Of course, we got the Sirius XM owned platforms. And then you go from Wondery, iHeartMedia, and, a little bit further down. But online brand used most often is Spotify, within the age range of 12 to 34. That's a big bracket. Okay. 35 to 54, it's kind of neck and neck between YouTube Music and Spotify. So it's kind of interesting to see the generational makeup, or the age range demographics, to see who mostly use Spotify. It's the 12 to 34. Now, is that going to continue once they age out of this bracket into 35, 54? Is it going to change where they were been listening to Spotify? Is that going to be, let's say, within another 10 to 15 years? Who knows the makeup of how Spotify will be then. YouTube, like I mentioned before, they've been making some inroads on trying to get more people to using the YouTube podcast feature, both video and audio. And it kind of, video podcasting has started growing more and more. A lot of times people were saying, yeah, just start your podcast audio format and just post it out everywhere, like Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, all the distribution models that are out there. And now the gurus are saying that it is more of a better idea to still be doing that, but the audio product as well, but also include video into the whole mix as is like an add-on bonus. So because especially if you're putting on YouTube, you have access to a wider audience. There's 5 billion potential eyeballs that are be able to see your video, and depending on what niche or topic that your podcast is about, it has a larger form of getting people to see it with this also a video format. So that's the thing, is like, okay, if I wanted to create a podcast, do I just focus on audio? Well, sure, you can still focus on that, but it's also, you want to add in the video portion as well. And now I understand most people don't want to have the video part. They don't feel comfortable talking into a camera, and that's perfectly fine. And you don't have to have a video portion of or a video side of your podcast, because you're still getting the audio format out there. As long as you have good audio, that's pretty much all you really need. To think about it, you can probably get a wider audience, because most of the time people are listening to your show or your episodes passively by either listening in the car as they drive into work, or going about their day, or doing chores, or they have you up on the TV. Because I have noticed that not a lot of, but I say a growing audience participation or audience viewing is via the TV, especially for YouTube. That it's interesting to see that more and more people are using their TV as a basis for listening or viewing your content, especially for a podcast, because you can easily have it on TV, have it going as you're doing like chores, washing dishes, vacuuming, clothes, whatever, or just, have it there as you're reading a book and just have it on, just listening to it while it's passively on a TV. But you can also do that through your phone or your stereo speakers if it's Bluetooth enabled. Podcast is a very passively heavily used medium to listen to. I don't know if I was getting words there right or not, but anyways, you can actively, or I should say passively, listen to a show. And that's what I believe most people are consuming your show in that manner. Now, there are people that would sit here and watch actively, like engaging and watching or listening to every single thing that you say. And, that's perfectly fine, because people are still consuming your content. And that's what you really want, is to get your content out there for people, your audience, to listen to start engaging with your content and on your episodes. And whether it's video or if it's audio, it doesn't really matter. It's what matters the most is that you are creating the content for your audience. And whether it's through Spotify or any of the number of the players or YouTube, it's just getting the content out there. And, that's a great thing. So I wanted to take some time in this episode to look at the Spotify active listeners, especially for Gen Z. I believe that is a new audience that are coming into learning about different things, say with like podcast creation or content creation as a whole, or gardening. It's just this whole new generation is coming into it, are looking for your content, and how you provide it is very important. So if you are part of Generation Z and you've actively listened to this podcast, I would love to get your comments. Give a 5-star rating and everything like that. Especially if you're listening on Spotify, definitely let me know in the comments, because you can leave a comment on Spotify and also on YouTube or anywhere else. But if you're also on Apple Podcasts, 5-star reviews are much appreciated. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Until next time, later, taters.